And with that, let's jump right into today's first presentation. That presentation is Telling Your Stories with Data Using Statistics to Create Statistical Narratives by Amy Parsons from Columbus State University Libraries. Amy is Head of Technical Services / Catalog Librarian and Associate Professor of Library Science. She's worked in libraries for over 30 years and has been at Columbus State University in Columbus, Georgia since 2017. Along with cataloging and collection management, Amy also manages all library-wide statistics, including electronic database usage and all library operations data. And with that, I'm going to stop my share. Amy, you can begin.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. And I suppose you can see me as well.
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Share my screen. Here we go. So thank you to SUNYLA for inviting me to present. I kind of designed this presentation like a story, so I've left some of it unscripted. And I'll go ahead and start with my agenda. So I'm going to start with where I started with combining statistics with stories. And I have a lot of examples to get through. And I found a couple pieces of literature that I'll share some tips from those. And then I will show you some more examples, and then we'll have time for a review and some tips, and then questions at the end. So going back to 2015, my very first story that I combined with stats. It was the first time I'd ever heard of the phrase statistical narrative. I had a new library director in 2015. And I was used to just giving, I was a cataloger then and a reference librarian, but I was used to just giving my library director my numbers for the month. And she came to me and said, Amy, these are just numbers. These are meaningless to me. And I was like, okay. And so she said, can you give me a story with these numbers? And I think she mentioned the phrase statistical narrative in that conversation. And of course, you're going to tell your new boss, sure, and I didn't know what I was doing. So I think I Googled it, because I knew what a narrative was and I knew what statistics were. So I thought, oh, okay. So this allows me, because I'm a pretty creative person, this allows me to be a little more creative with numbers. I'm not really a numbers person. I'm not really a math person, but life is full of ironies, right? I swore I'd never do cataloging, and cataloging has been almost my entire career. And now I'm in charge of statistics at a fairly large library. So here I am working with numbers. So as time went on, and I built these spreadsheets and pulled and made graphs, I got a little more confident, and I started learning a little bit more about Excel. And I started comparing things and thinking about things and looking at trends. And I just continued to slice and dice the information, more comparisons. And looking back, this was kind of like exercises for me because I grew more confident with what I was doing. I was teaching myself how to use Excel a little bit more. And this was before analytics, because you know how technology changes so quickly these days. So this was before you even heard about a librarian that would focus solely on analytics. Plus, I've always worked in libraries where we've worn multiple hats, and I think most of us have worked in libraries where you're short-staffed and you do multiple things. So as time went on, more comparisons, and then I sliced and diced it into 5 years of new titles. And then in early 2016, in order for me to really learn something, and I think in order for most of us to really learn something, it helps to explain it to others. So in 2016, I pulled a lot of my charts and graphs together, and created this poster for a library conference in Ohio where I was working. It's my home state. So I explained it to others, what I was doing. My poster was called "No, We Don't Just Read Books All Day, Developing Statistical Narratives, Infographics for Technical Services." So little did I know that by the end of that year, I would be packing up my stuff and moving to South Georgia. But, you know, life's full of those interesting ironies. So here I am living the dream in South Georgia. One of the foreshadowing things on this poster, which I know it's a little small in the slide, but it is, I've got it listed in my references at the end, and you can see it at the Digital Commons at Otterbein. It's been downloaded over 80 times, so I'm hoping somebody gets some use out of it. One of the things I said was cataloging is only one story. There's lots of different stories from the library where you could pull numbers and tell stories. So now I want to go to the articles that I found. Now, I did not do a really deep dive into looking for articles about telling stories with numbers to support libraries. There are thousands of articles on assessment, as we know, but there aren't many articles on practical application. So I found these two articles that are fairly useful. The first one is Telling Your Library Story One Number at a Time. It was written in 2014 by Darlene Fitcher and Jeff Wisniewski. And they mentioned the why. They say a statistical narrative sticks to the facts, but explains the data in a context that resonates with the reader. A memorable story tells the reader why a particular measurement is important and what it signifies. And also, visual images will give you more impact. They mentioned that visual images are processed by the brain 60,000 times faster than text. So they make quite an impact with the reader. And yes, on this photo that I have here on the right, the bookshelf is broken, and I will tell you a little bit about that later. Controlling the cognitive load. The author said to use plain language, stay away from acronyms. So readers don't have to work hard to grasp about the point you're trying to make. I always try to keep in mind that when I create these stories with statistics, the audience is usually bigger than who's in the library. And another good point is using comparisons. I think we're all curious about comparisons. I think it's just, you know, we think about, well, what do other librarians think about this? And comparing the present to the past with some context for the reader just makes it interesting. The next article is from 2021. It's by Mary Jo Finch. It's called Learning from Our Statistics, 12 Simple Rules for Understanding and Using Our Numbers Better. So Finch wrote that you need to understand what you're measuring when you count. On their own, lists of numbers tell us very little, but when we put context behind them and collect them over time, they help us see trends and help us tell the story. And she also mentions it's better to count than estimate because math is a precise science, and she recommends counting when at all possible and to be consistent and use the same parameters or metrics every time. Now, I do have an example of something I created where I did estimate, and I'll explain that in a little bit. Statistics are related, interrelated. When you change your ad services, be prepared to start tracking them. We added mobile hotspots this year and some fast chargers, and now I track usage on those. Some numbers will go down and some will go up, you know, as time goes on. And more is not always better. When a statistical measure drops, think about your goals for your community, think about your community. An example is I am tracking hotspots now, and reference numbers for reference books are way down because no one ever uses reference books and collections anymore. It's just the way of the world now. Don't look at your numbers too often because you need to, one of the values of looking at numbers over time is seeing the trends. And be aware of unwarranted conclusions. When numbers seem to point to a problem, look at all possible causes. When looking at differences in statistics, consider data from other sources that might lend an explanation or insight. So, more assessments that I have done. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on all of the ways that I looked at the third floor space, because in 2018 and 2019, we did a major weeding here at Schwab Memorial Library here at Columbus State. And we were tasked with moving our entire collection from 3 floors to 1 floor. So I'll mention that. And I did a cataloging committee Eric microfiche survey, which sounds really boring, but I made it a little bit more interesting. And way back in 2012, when I worked at Otterbein, we counted people in the library. We called it the body count because we had to do it every couple of hours. And we were trying to make a point with numbers, with statistics on how many people were using a library 7 days a week. So I don't have a chart for that one, but apparently when I moved to Georgia, I lost some of my files, but I wanted to bring that one up because it's different than just technical services. So this chart went along with a narrative about the number of shelves and shelf space. Like I said, we moved all of our stuff to 1 floor. We now house basically 99.9% really of our physical collection on 1 floor. So our space is always being scrutinized now. And I've come up with many different ways to look at our space. And we've worked together as a group to really start to scrutinize, with regards to collection management. Another way that I charted this is I physically went up and counted the number of shelves per subject area. Now that wasn't a perfect analysis, but it did give us some insight as to what was up on the 3rd floor. And we had an unusually large number of economics books, but we don't have an economics major. So this chart gave us some help in visualizing where to concentrate on a little bit more weeding and curation for collection management. Here's another piece of the library space assessment. So this is basically the data that I pulled together for a meeting that we had about what was on the 3rd floor and how much empty space there was on the 3rd floor once we got everything up there. Our situation was, of course, affected by the pandemic. So in 2018 and 2019, we did a lot of weeding, and I'll get to that in a moment. And then we were able to get everything to the 3rd floor, and we were rushed. We had to get it up there as quickly as possible, and it was a huge undertaking. So we got it all up there. And you remember the picture a few slides ago with the broken shelves. Things were just crammed from head to toe. Shelves were broken. And then the pandemic hit. So we were out of the office for at least a month. And then when we came back, as you know, in Georgia, we were not locked down for very long. But we did have a staggered work schedule when we did come back. When we came back, we started shifting the books and making them more accessible and cleaning it up. So this is where all this scrutinizing these numbers came from. Now, what I didn't like about what I did with this report was I basically stated all of this information, and I didn't really create much of a narrative with this. Looking back, I wish I would have written a little more of a story with this one. So getting to another story, the microfiche survey. About a year ago, the USG libraries were in a consortium. They wanted us to find some data on the usage of microfiche from all 26 schools. So they gave this task to the cataloging committee. So we sent out questions in several formats, and we got back, we had a Google survey, and we had an Excel spreadsheet. And we eventually got about 26 responses. So I was tasked with taking this summary to the directors meeting and reporting back to them. So I thought, well, gosh, you know, microfiche is pretty boring. So in addition to having a table with everyone's answers, I added some context with some background information, as you see here in this slide. And then I got some quotes from library staff about microfiche. Excuse me. Adding the actual quotes from people working in libraries, I think, made more of an impact. Like, I really liked, we're weeding all of ours because we no longer have the machines to view them. I liked that one. And the other one I really liked was, I look forward to the day when the online repository crashes and the single library that kept the fiche makes its budget back in interlibrary loan fees. I thought that was great. Now, another way to look at stories meshed with data are data-driven budget decisions. This is a spreadsheet that made my head hurt. This is a spreadsheet that was made by a colleague that had a lot of raw data in it. We were trying to look at whether it made sense to keep some print journals versus cutting what was left. And I think we've all been in this situation these days because most of our collection is now electronic. But this was a few years ago. So I looked at this spreadsheet and I decided I needed to make one point to the group. So I attempted to make a point with my colleagues that basically 80% of the titles were not used in the last 3 years, which meant that 91% of the print titles did not get used. So sometimes making one statement, pulling out one simple statement from all the noise from a spreadsheet is impactful. They eventually saw my logic and we got rid of a lot more paper. More data-driven decisions. This is a screenshot of my data that I track for electronic databases. This is one piece of it. There's actually 135 lines of this, and you can't see my notes screen, my notes column on the right. So this past fall, we were given a directive to analyze usage stats in order to make some more decisions about the budget and budget cuts. So I decided to simplify this for the group who was discussing this, because some members of the meeting were not librarians, they were administrative folks. So I basically simplified my list. I pulled all of the EBSCO and ProQuest numbers into one big number because they were discovery searches. And as you can see, EBSCO dominated the whole thing. And I think the pie chart was pretty redundant. But I just tried to simplify it to make it easier for folks to see. This was in 2019. I pulled together a quick annual report because I wanted to showcase just how hard we were working in cataloging with weeding and physically getting rid of all of these items. So in 2019, we discarded over 42,000 items. And I'm so glad when we went through these processes that I took a lot of photos, because I was able to make quite an impact with the photos. This one, you can see my colleague Eric way down at the end of this. These are pallets that we created, 72 pallets of books that were taken away either by Better World Books or auctioned off by the state. We were actually fired by Better World Books because we abused them so much by giving them too much stuff. So now our things are auctioned off by the state of Georgia. And another little bit of information I wanted to make clear to my library dean was that pulling the last copy in Georgia's out and working through these took a lot of work, and only 10% were requested to be kept by the University of Georgia. So having these photos made an impact. So to recap or overview, I've told you about cataloging stories, more broader technical service stories, a lot of collection management stories, my library hours story, stories to prove a point, and stories to support data-driven budget decisions. Tips to make an impact. One of the things I've started to do as I was given the responsibility of all library operations statistics is to keep a notes tab on the right side of all of your Excel spreadsheets. I note any strange happenings with a database, and I try to date it so I can remember and I can recall the story later. And photos, if you're doing a big project, include photos, take lots of photos, then you can pull them out later and add them to your stories. They make a big impact. And if you're not responsible for collecting numbers, make a friend with your systems librarian or whoever's the administrator of numbers within your library, because data is going to come from various places. Or if you just want to only, if you're managing your department or your workload within your department, just track your own numbers and try to keep it simple, because some of these charts and graphs can be a lot of noise, very noisy. And I found that I've made more impact by just simplifying it. And it's helped me learn just to bite off smaller chunks. So what's next for me is we are currently getting ready to change our library management system to go live with EBSCO's Folio in July 2025. So we will be getting Panorama for statistics. So I'm learning, we currently have ALMA, and I've taught myself how to move around and utilize ALMA analytics. I've probably need a lot more years with ALMA before I could say I could master it, but I have taught myself a lot, and I'm looking forward to learning more about Panorama, which uses the Tableau platform, and how to utilize analytics with telling library stories. I think because I was raised in an analog world, that learning how to do it from scratch, learning how to do it with Excel spreadsheets, learning how to do it, pull numbers from, just a pencil and paper. It helped me get a nice foundation for going forward and learning how to utilize analytics. Here's my references, and thank you. And I can take questions.
Well, thank you, Amy. That was great. It spawned a lot of lively discussion in the chat. I always wish we heard more about data stories, so I really appreciated this presentation. I think others did too. I'm going to go into the Q&A now and read some of these questions. If anyone has any questions for Amy, again, please put them in the Q&A and we will get to them. The first question someone asked is, where was the presentation kept? Digital Commons or something?
Oh, the poster? Which
I
present?
assume so.
Yeah, the poster, there's a link. Let me see if I can go back. This poster. It is housed at Digital Commons at Otterbein. So there's a link in my references in this slideshow. So you can get to that from there.
Great, thank you. And just for all the attendees, we're going to be sharing the slides of all the presenters today, along with the recordings roughly a week or two after this conference. So you'll be getting all of this information. Okay, another question we have. Sometimes we can't avoid the huge, confusing Excel spreadsheet, for example, asking people to review weeding decisions. Do you have any ideas for how to make those more approachable by people who don't spend a lot of time with spreadsheets?
I would just say try to simplify. and play around with your numbers. Trying to think. One of the things here, I found that this one made a lot of impact with the group. This was just really simple. I just went up and guesstimated really how many shelves social sciences and economics took, and then I tried to keep in mind who my audience is, because like we said, when something like this comes up, everybody's eyes kind of glaze over. So you really got to think about how to simplify it. And think about what point you're trying to make. This I
Okay, thank
really
you. Oh,
simplified as
sorry.
well. That's okay.
Okay, next question. Did you get any pushback from faculty or admin about the volume of weeding? We did a
Oh,
huge
yeah.
weeding project over the last 3 years, and we were a bit scared for faculty to find out just how many volumes we were weeding, because sometimes they just want books, even if those books are terribly outdated.
Yes, yes. Well, when we were told that several offices were moving into our building on the second floor, they were taking the entire second floor. The architects did some measurements, of course, and told us that we would have to get rid of approximately 30% of our collection. And really, things move slow here in the South, and they really do. Weeding is not a big priority with a lot of the librarians. And we had a lot of stuff that really was outdated and needed to go. So we knew that we needed to get rid of things. And we were mindful, we tried to be mindful of areas that were well loved by faculty. We didn't get a lot of pushback by faculty, but we had a lot of librarians that were anxious about angering them. But the president of the university, it was kind of like a mandate that we did this. And we weren't sure we were going to get rid of 30%, but at the end of all of that, I think we really did get rid of 30%.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. Your data is from 2010 to 2015. Is it correct? Do you collect data for every academic year?
Well, some of the data that I have in this presentation was pulled from my previous job, because I wanted to show the stories from there. And yes, my current position, I was given the responsibility to collect data. Oh gosh, let me think. I think in 2020, 2021, something like that. So yeah, and then the person that did it before me, we kind of organize it by fiscal year. So we have folders for every single year. I have library operations data, and then I have electronic resources data.
Okay, thank you. Someone just asked if you could put the references slide back up, please.
Sure.
And
I kept it short and sweet, because really it was just all of my stuff.
someone else wants to know, do you involve faculty members in the process of weeding?
Yes and no. As much as we can get them involved, we go to department meetings, and if we're looking at weeding an area, each of us have different liaison areas, and I know one of mine is psychology. And I've gone to their meetings and said, I'm going to be weeding, the collection. We've invited them to come over and review, sections of the collection with us. Another kind of weeding is electronic weeding, because we're always scrutinizing usage statistics. So I try to keep them aware of, hey, we're not getting very much use out of this database. If you want us to keep it, you better start using it. And, we're always scrutinizing that. And I think usage statistics for databases is weighing a lot more than even looking at circulation numbers for physical books.
Thank you. And yeah, I can attest to those usage statistics.
Yeah.
You know, people sometimes, don't even want the the circ stats. They just want the
Yeah,
usage.
that is.
Someone else has a question. Can you say something about the backshifting part of the project? Who did the work? What time of year? And how long did it take?
Oh my gosh, I did a whole presentation on this for the Georgia Library Association. It was a lot of work. So like I said, we started aggressively weeding more in 2018 and 2019. And in 2019, they did the construction on the second floor. And we were literally putting books on carts, taking them up the elevator, offloading them into their correct, quote, correct spots. And the men were behind me tearing down shelves and pulling out carpet. It was dirty. And it wasn't just me, it was our student workers, our entire library staff was working incredibly hard to get everything, keep things in as much of an order as possible, and get them all upstairs. It took, I think, a year, more or less, between the weeding. And the crazy thing about the technical services group, there are only a few of us. So I was up there helping keep things in order and kind of project managing folks and working. And then I was in charge of the workflow for getting the stuff out of the system. And I had a cataloging assistant that helped me and a part-time assistant. And then we had the logistics of putting them in the boxes and having the men from the service department come with their forklifts and take the big pallets away. So it was a team effort for sure. And I don't ever want to do that again. But ironically, once we got everything up there, the pandemic hit because I wanted to get up there with the circulation, one of the staff, and shift everything so it was accessible because it was a mess. If things were falling over, things were cramped. But we weren't able to get back up there to do that until I think it was May of 2020 when we started coming back. A skeleton crew, more or less, like every couple of days we worked from home and then we'd come in. And the creepy part is when we first started the weeding, I was wearing a mask. I started thinking, gosh, this dust is horrible. So I got a mask and I thought, gosh, I never wear masks, and then that next year, masks became part of our daily life. It was just really interesting. But it was a huge, huge amount of work.
It certainly sounds like that. And thank you for sharing that. We're a little over, so there's a question that we won't get to right now, but I'm going to forward that on to you, and
Okay.
then we'll share all questions with answers that were asked later with everyone after the conference.
Okay.
So thank you very much for that presentation. It was really great, and we appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much.